to my dear Father, who will burn it immediately. My dear Father, you must understand that at first I intended to make a general confession of my sins without adding anything else, but your guardian angel reproved me and told me to obey and give a short summary of all that has happened in my life, both good and bad. How difficult it is, dear Father, to obey in this matter. But please be careful. You may read and reread this as often as you wish, but do not show it to anyone else. And when you are through with it, burn it up immediately. Do you understand? The angel promised to help me recall everything to mind. I told him plainly and pleaded with him that I do not want to do this. I was frightened at the thought of recalling everything, but the angel assured me that he would help me. I think, dear Father, that when you read this and learn of all my sins, you will be angry with me and will no longer want to be my Father. Still, I hope that you will always be willing. So prepare yourself to learn of every kind of sin. And you, dear Father, do you approve of what the angel told me, that I should speak of my whole life? That's his order, and I take for granted that's what is in your mind and heart. By writing everything, both good and bad, you will be able to see better how bad I have been and how good others have been to me. You will see how ungrateful I have shown myself toward Jesus and how much I have failed to listen to the good advice of my parents and teachers. So I begin the task, dear Father. Live Jesus. Earliest memories, her mother. The first thing I remember is that when I was a little girl, not 7 years old, my mother used to take me into her arms, and often when she did this, she cried and said to me, I have prayed so much that Jesus would give me a little girl. He has given me this consolation, it is true, but too late. I am ill, she would say to me, and I must die. I must leave you. Oh, if I could only take you with me. Would you come? I understood very little of this, but I wept because I saw my mother weeping. And where are you going? I asked her. To heaven with Jesus and the angels, she replied. It was my mother, dear Father, who first made me want to go to heaven when I was just a little child. And when I still show this desire, I am reprimanded and receive an emphatic no for an answer. But when my mother asked me this, I told her that I did want to go with her. And I remember that when she spoke so often of taking me to heaven with her, I did not want to be separated from her. I would not even leave her room. The doctor forbade me to go near mother's bed, but such a command was useless, for I did not obey. Every evening before going to bed, I would go to her, and kneeling beside her bed, I would say my prayers. One evening she had me add to the usual prayers a De Profundis to the souls in purgatory and 5 Glorias to the wounds of Jesus. I said these prayers, but as usual, carelessly and without attention. All my life I have never paid attention to my prayers. I made a great show over it, complaining to my mother that these were too many prayers to say and I didn't want to say them. And she, indulgent as she was, shortened the prayers after that. Confirmation, 1885. Her Mother in Heaven, 1886. Meanwhile, the time was coming when I was to receive confirmation. I wanted to take some instructions because I knew nothing. But bad as I was, I would not leave my mother's room, and a catechist had to come to our house every evening, where I took the instructions in the presence of my mother. On the 26th of May, 1885, received confirmation, but I did so weeping. For after the function there was to be a mass, and I was always afraid that mother would go away, die, without taking me with her. I assisted at the mass as best I could, all the while praying for her. All of a sudden I heard a voice in my heart saying to me, "Are you willing to give your mother to me?" "Yes," I answered. "If you will take me too." "No," replied the voice. "Give me your mother willingly. But you must remain with your father for the present. I will take your mother to heaven, understand? Do you give her to me willingly?" I was forced to give my consent. When the mass was over, I ran home. Oh my God, I looked at mother and wept. I simply could not contain myself. 2 more months passed. I never left her side, but finally my father, who feared that I would die before mother, forced me to leave one day and took me to the home of my mother's brother, who lived near Lucca. Father, dear Father, such was my lot. What a torture it was. I did not see anyone, neither my father nor my brothers. I learned that my mother died on September 17th of that year, at S. Gennaro with her uncle. My life was changed when I went to live with my uncle. My aunt was there, but she was in no way like my mother. She was good and religious, but was interested in the church only to a certain point. I had formerly complained that my mother had made me pray too much. But all the time that I was with my aunt, I could not even go to confession, which I wanted so much. I had been to confession only 7 times, and I wanted to go every day after the death of my mother. My mother had made me go every week after my confirmation. My aunt decided to keep me as her daughter, but my brother, who is now dead, learned of it and would not allow it. So on Christmas Day, I returned to my family and lived with my father, my brothers, my 2 sisters, one of whom I did not know because she had been taken away shortly after her birth, and 2 servants. What consolation I experienced on returning to my family and being out of the hands of my aunt. She wanted the best for me, but I wanted none of it. My father then sent me to school at the Institute of St. Zita, which was conducted by nuns. During the time when I was with my aunt, I was always bad. She had a son who was always tormenting me, pulling my hands behind me. One day when he was on a horse 15 hands high, my aunt told me to take him some kind of a coat to put on. I took it to him, and when I was near, he pinched me. Then I gave him a hard push, and he fell off and hurt his head. In punishment, my aunt tied my hands behind me for the entire day. Thus mistreated, I got very angry, and I told him so with strong words. I even threatened to get even, but did not do so. The School of St. Zita, First Communion, 1887. I started to school at the nun school, and it was heaven for me. I immediately expressed my desire to make my first communion, but they found me so bad and so ignorant that they discouraged me from it. They began, however, to instruct me and to give me much good advice, but I only became worse. Nevertheless, my only desire was to make my first communion soon, and they, knowing how strong was my desire, granted my request before long. The nuns used to have the children make their first communion in the month of June. The time had come, and I had to ask my father's permission to enter the convent for a short time. My father, who was indisposed, did not grant me permission. But I knew a very clever way to make him let me do anything, so I used it and got the permission at once. Every time my father saw me weeping, he would grant me whatever I wanted. I cried, otherwise I would not have received the permission. In the evening he gave it, and early the next morning I went into the convent, where I remained for 15 days. During this time I saw none of my family, but how happy I was. What a heaven it was, dear Father. Once inside the convent, I found it to my liking and ran to the chapel to thank Jesus. I begged him fervently to prepare me for Holy Communion. But I had also another desire besides this. When I was a little girl, my mother used to show me the crucifix and tell me that Christ died on the cross for men. Later on, my teachers taught me the same thing, but I had never understood it. Now I wanted to know all about the life and passion of Jesus. I told my teacher of this desire, and she began, day by day, to explain these things to me, choosing for this a time when the other children were in bed. She did this, I believe, without the Mother Superior knowing of it. One evening, when she was explaining something to me about the crucifixion, the crowning with thorns, and all the sufferings of Jesus, she explained it so very well that a great sorrow and compassion came over me. So much so that I was seized immediately with fever so intense that I was forced to remain in bed all the next day. From that day on, the teacher explained such things only briefly. These nuns caused me some disquiet. They wanted to inform my father that I had contracted the fever, but it did cause a lot of trouble, not only for me but for them and for the whole convent. This happened especially during the 10 days of the retreat. 8. With 11 other children, I began the retreat on the day of June. Father Raphael Cianetti preached the 9 retreat. All the children devoted themselves eagerly to prepare well to receive Jesus. Among so many, only I was very negligent and distracted. I gave no thought to changing my life. I listened to the sermons, but very soon forgot what I heard. Often, even every day, that good Father said, "He who eats of Jesus will live of his life." These words filled me with much consolation, and I reasoned with myself, therefore, when Jesus comes to me, I will no longer live of myself, because Jesus will live in me. And I nearly died of the desire to be able to say these words, "Soon Jesus lives in me." Sometimes I would spend whole nights meditating on these words, being consumed with desire. Finally, the day I wanted so much arrived. The day before I wrote these few lines to my father: "Dear Papa, today is the vigil of my first Holy Communion, a day of great joy for me. I write these lines to assure you of my affection and to beg you to pray to Jesus that the first time he comes to me, he may find me disposed to receive all those graces that he has prepared for me. I beg your pardon for all the displeasures and all the disobedience that I have been guilty of, and I beg you this evening to forget all these things. Asking your blessing, I am your affectionate daughter, Gemma. I prepared myself, with much work on the part of those good nuns, for my general confession. I made it in 3 sessions to MSGR. Volpe. I finished it on Saturday, the vigil of that happy day. Finally, Sunday 11 morning came. I arose early and ran to Jesus for the first time. At last my desires were realized. I understood for the first time the promise of Jesus, "He who eats of me shall live of my life." Dear Father, I do not know how to tell what passed between Jesus and me at that moment. Jesus made himself felt very strongly by my poor soul. I understood at that moment that the delights of heaven are not like those of the earth. I felt myself overcome by the desire to render that union with my God continual. I felt weary of the world more and more disposed to recollection. It was that same morning that Jesus gave me the great desire to be a religious. First Communion resolutions. Before leaving the convent, I made certain resolutions regarding the conduct of my life. SS1. I will receive confession and communion each time as though it were my last. SS2. I will visit Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament often, especially when I am afflicted. SS3. I will prepare myself for every feast of our Blessed Mother by some mortification, and every evening I will ask my Heavenly Mother's blessing. SS4. I want to remain always in the presence of God. SS5. Every time the clock strikes, I will repeat 3 times, "My Jesus, mercy." I would have liked to add other resolutions to these, but my teacher would not permit it, and she had good reason, for within a year after I returned to my family, I had forgotten these resolutions, as well as the good advice I had received, and I became worse than before. I continued to go to school to the nuns, and they were fairly satisfied with me. I went to communion 2 or 3 times a week, and Jesus made himself felt ever stronger. Several times he made me feel very great consolation. But as soon as I left him, I began to be proud, more disobedient than before, a bad example to my companions and a scandal to all. At school, not a day passed on which I was not punished. I did not know my lessons, and I was almost expelled. At home, I would not let anyone have peace. Every day I wanted to go for a walk, always wearing new clothes which my poor father provided me for a long time. I ceased to say my usual prayers morning and evening. But while I was committing all these sins, I never forgot to recite every day 3 Hail Marys with my hands under my knees, a practice my mother had taught me that Jesus might protect me every day from sins against holy purity. Charity toward the poor new conversion. During this time, which lasted almost an entire year, the only thing I had left was charity to the poor. Every time I left the house, I asked my father for money. If he sometimes refused it, I would take bread, flour, or some such thing. And God himself would see to it that I met some poor people, for every time I left the house there would be 3 or 4. To those who came to the door I would give clothes or whatever else I had. But then my confessor forbade me to do these things, and I stopped doing them. In this way Jesus worked in me a new conversion. For my father no longer gave me money, I could take nothing from the house, and every time I went out I met none but poor people, and they all ran after me. I could not give them anything. This pained me so that I wept continually. For this reason I quit going out except when I really had to. The result was that I grew tired of clothes and everything else. I wanted to make another general confession, but I was not permitted to do so. I did confess everything 13, however, and Jesus gave me such a deep sorrow for my sins that I felt it always. I asked pardon of my teachers, because I had displeased them most of all. But this change did not please my father and my brothers. One brother especially chided me because I wanted to go to Mass every morning. But from then on Jesus helped me more than ever, living with her aunts. At this time, as my grandfather and uncle were dead, 2 of my aunts, my father's sisters, came to live with us. They were good, religious, and affectionate, but their affection was never the tender love of a mother. They took us to church every day, and they were diligent in instructing us in the religion. Among us brothers and sisters, some were better and some worse. The oldest boy, the 4th of our family to die, and the youngest girl, Julia, were the best, and so were more loved by my aunts. But the others, who took my bad example, were far more lively and so less appreciated. Nonetheless, none of us lacked what was needed. I was always the worst of all, and who knows what a strict account I must give to the Lord for the bad example that I gave to my brothers and companions. My aunts never failed to correct me in all my failings, but I responded arrogantly, giving them many short answers. Now, as I have said, Jesus used my prohibition to give alms as means to convert me. I began to think of how much my sins offended Jesus. I began also to study and work harder, and my teachers continued to encourage me. The one defect for which I was often reproved and punished was my pride. My teacher frequently called me pride personified. Yes, this was my greatest sin, but only Jesus knows whether I realized it or not. Many a time I fell on my knees before my teacher and all the class, and even the Mother Superior, to beg pardon for this sin. And also many a time in the evening I wept when I was alone. I was not aware of this sin, and every day I fell into it time and again without adverting to it.e.eker. The teacher who at the time of my retreat had explained the Passion to me reproved me one day and explained the matter to me, perhaps because she had noticed a change in me. But she did so little by little. She often said to me, "Gemma, you belong to Jesus and you should be all his. Be good. Jesus is pleased with you and you need much help. Meditation on the Passion ought to be something very close to your heart. Oh, if you could always be with me." That good teacher had detected my desire. At other times she said to me, "Gemma, what graces Jesus has given you." I, who never understood all this, remained as one dumb. But sometimes I felt the need of a little talk, and I don't hesitate to say it, of a caress from my dear teacher, so I ran looking for her. Sometimes she would appear very serious, and when I saw her like that I would cry. Then she would take me into her arms, even though I was 11 years old, and caress me. As a result, I was so attached to her that I called her my mother. Retreat of 1891. Every 2 years the nuns used to have a retreat which was open also to the external students. It hardly seemed true that I could commune so intimately with Jesus again. But this time I was all alone without any help, for the nuns were making their own retreat at the same time as the children. I understood well that Jesus was giving me this opportunity to know myself better and to purify myself and please him more. The retreat was held in 1891, and during this time Gemma was to be completely changed as to give herself entirely to Jesus. I recall the words which that good priest repeated so often: "Let us remember that we are nothing and that God is all." God is our creator, and all that we have he has given us. I remember that after a few days of the retreat the preacher had us make a meditation on sin. It was then that I came to realize, dear Father, that I was worthy only to be despised by all. I saw myself to be so ungrateful to God, guilty as I was of so many sins. Then we made a meditation on hell, of which I knew myself to be deserving, and during this meditation I made this resolution: I will make acts of contrition during the day, especially when I have committed some fault. During the last days of the retreat we considered the example of humility, meekness, obedience, and patience of Jesus. And from this meditation I formed 2 more resolutions. SS1. To make a visit to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament every day and speak to him more with the heart than with the tongue. SS2. I will try harder to avoid speaking of indifferent things and to speak rather of heavenly things. At the end of the retreat I obtained permission from my confessor to receive communion 3 times a week, and likewise to go to confession 3 times a week, and I continued to do this for 3 or 4 years until 1895. Meditation on the Passion of Jesus. I continued to go to school every day, but the desire to receive Jesus and to know more about his passion increased, so much so that I succeeded in getting my teacher to explain it to me for an entire hour after every 10 hours of work or study. I desired nothing else. Every day I worked or studied 10 hours and spent an hour listening to the explanation of some point on the Passion. Many times as I thought of my sins and my ingratitude to Jesus, we began to weep together. It was during these 4 years that this good teacher taught me also to perform some little penance for Jesus. The first was the wearing of a little rope around my body, and there were many others. But no matter how hard I tried, I never obtained the permission of my confessor for these things. Therefore she taught me rather to mortify my eyes and my tongue. She succeeded in making me better, but with much difficulty. This good teacher died after having led me along for 6 years. Then I came under the direction of another who was fully as good as the first. But she also had to reprove me often for the ugly sin of pride. Under her direction I began to have a great desire to pray more. Every evening as soon as school was out I would go home and shut myself up in my room and recite the entire rosary on my knees. And often I would rise during the night for about a quarter of an hour to recommend my poor soul to Jesus, your father's Benjamin, her brother Gino. My aunts and my brothers did not pay such attention to me. They let me do whatever I wanted because they knew how bad I was. But my father always took great delight in me. He often said, and this often made me cry, I have only 2 children, Gino and Gemma. He said such things in the presence of all the others, and to tell the truth, we were about the most mischievous in the house. I loved Gino more than the rest. We were always together. During vacation time, we would amuse ourselves by making little altars, celebrating feats, etc., and in this we were always alone. As he grew up, he had the desire of becoming a priest, so he was sent to seminary and put on clerical dress, but a few years later he died. During the time when he was sick in bed, he wanted me always near him. The doctor gave up all hope for him. Since I was so sorry that he was going to die, I started using all his things so that I would die too. As a matter of fact, I almost did die. I became very seriously ill about a month later. I cannot describe the care all lavished on me, especially my father. Many times I saw him weeping and begging Jesus to let him die in my place. He used every means possible to cure me, and after 3 months I was well again. She leaves school necklaces of a Vows of the crucified. The doctor forbade me to study anymore, and I quit school. Many times the superior and the nuns sent for me to come and be with them, but my father would not let me go. Every day he took me outside. He gave me everything I wanted. And I began to pamper myself once more. But I kept going to communion 3 or 4 times a week, and even though I was so bad, Jesus came and dwelt with me and said many things to me. I recall very well one time I was given a gold watch and chain. Ambitious as I was, I could hardly wait to put it on and go out, an indication, dear Father, that my imagination was working on me. I did, in fact, go out with it on, and when I returned and started to take it off, I saw an angel, whom I recognized immediately as my guardian angel, who said to me very seriously, remember that the precious jewelry that adorns a spouse of the crucified King can only be thorns and the cross. I did not even tell my confessor about this. In fact, I now tell it for the first time. These words made me fear, as did the angel himself. But a little later, while reflecting on them without understanding them at all, I made this resolution. I resolved, for the love of Jesus and to please him, never to wear the watch again, and not even to speak of things that savor vanity. At the time, I also had a ring on my finger. I took it off immediately, and from that day to this I have not worn such things. So I resolved, because Jesus had given me clear lights to the effect that I should be a religious, to change my life. I had a good occasion to do this, for we were about to begin the year of 1896. I wrote in a little notebook, during this new year I resolved to begin a new life. I do not know what will happen to me during this year, but I abandon myself entirely to you, my God, and my aspirations and all my affections will be for you. I feel so weak, dear Jesus, but with 18 your help I hope and resolve to live a different life, that is, a life closer to you. Desire for heaven. From the moment when my mother inspired me with the desire for heaven, I have always, even in the midst of so many sins, wanted it ardently. If God had left the choice to me, I would have preferred to escape from the body and fly to heaven. Every time a fever came upon me and I felt ill, I experienced a great consolation. But this changed to sorrow when, after some illness, I would feel my strength return. One day after Holy Communion, I asked Jesus why he did not take me to heaven. He answered, my daughter, I do not take you because during your life I will give you many occasions to gain more merit, increasing your desire for heaven as you bear the trials of life with patience. These words in no way diminished my desire. Rather, I felt it increasing in me day by day, loving Jesus and suffering with him. During this same year of 1896, another desire began to grow in me. I began to feel an ever greater yearning to love Jesus crucified very much, and at the same time a desire to suffer with him and to help him in his sufferings. One day, as I was looking at the crucifix, so great a sorrow came over me that I fell to the floor. My father was in the house at the time, and he began to reprove me, saying that it was not good for me to stay at home and that I should go out early the next morning. He had not let me go to Mass the last 2 mornings. I answered in a disturbed tone of voice, it is not good for me to remain away from Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. My answer disturbed him because he noticed that my voice was not very strong. I hid myself in a room, and there, for the first time, I gave vent to my sorrow with Jesus alone. Dear Father, I do not remember the words I spoke, but my angel is here, and he tells me what I said word for word. It is as follows: I want to follow you no matter what the cost in pain, and to follow you fervently. No, Jesus, I do not want to continue displeasing you by a tepid life as I have done up to now. That would amount to coming to you to bring you displeasure. Therefore, I resolve to make my prayer more devout and my communions more frequent. Jesus, I want to suffer, and to suffer much for you. Prayer will ever be on my lips. If even he falls often who makes frequent resolutions, what will happen to him who resolves but rarely, dear Father? These words came from my heart in that moment of sorrow and of hope when I was alone with my Jesus. I have made so many resolutions and I never kept any of them. Every day, amid so many sins of every kind, I would ask Jesus to let me suffer and suffer much. Pain in her foot. After a little, Jesus sent me a consolation. He sent me a pain in one of my feet. I kept this secret for a while, but the pain was severe. A doctor came and said an operation was necessary, and perhaps the foot would have to be amputated. All of my family was greatly worried, and only I was indifferent. I remember that while they were performing the operation, I cried and complained loudly. But then, looking at Jesus, I begged him to pardon my folly. Jesus also sent me other pains, and I can say with truth that ever since the death of my mother, I have never spent a day without suffering some little thing for Jesus. During this time, I never ceased to commit sins. I became worse every day. I was full of every kind of fault, and I do not understand why Jesus never showed himself angry with me. Only once did I see Jesus angry at me, and I would rather suffer the pains of hell 1,000 times in this life than find myself before Jesus so displeased, and to see before my eyes the horrible picture of my soul, as I did on the occasion of which I will speak later. 19. Her first vow. On Christmas Day of 1896, I was permitted to go to Mass and receive Holy Communion. I was about 15 years old at the time, and I had already often asked my confessor for permission to make a vow of virginity. I had asked for this for many years, but I did not really know what it was. It only seemed to me that it was the most beautiful adornment I could offer to Jesus. He would not let me take this vow of virginity, but instead allowed me to make a vow of chastity. So on Christmas night, I made my first vow to Jesus. I remember that Jesus was so pleased with it that he asked me after Holy Communion to unite with this vow the offering of my whole self and all my sentiments in abandonment to his holy will. I did this with such a joy that I spent that night and the next day as if in heaven. A year of great sorrow, 1897, death of her father. That year came to an end, and we entered upon the year of 1897, which was a year of great sorrow for all my family. I alone, being heartless, remained unmoved in the face of so many afflictions. The thing that troubled the others the most was the fact that we were deprived of all means of livelihood, and added to this, my father was seriously ill. One morning after communion, I understood what a great sacrifice Jesus would ask of us soon. I wept very much, but Jesus made himself felt in my soul all the more during those sorrowful days. I saw my father so perfectly resigned to die that I felt strong enough to bear these sorrows very calmly. On the day of his death, Jesus told me not to give way to useless weeping and wailing, so I spent the day praying in resignation to the will of God, who at that moment took the role of both my heavenly and earthly father. With her aunt in Camayor, returned to Lucca, 1898. After my father's death, we found ourselves destitute. We had only enough to live on. One of my aunts, realizing this, helped us a great deal. She was unwilling that I should remain with my family. So the day after my father's death, she sent for me and had me stay with her for several months. This was not the aunt with whom I lived after my mother's death, but another one. Every morning she took me to Mass, but I seldom received communion because I could not bring myself to go to confession to anyone besides Monsignor. During that time, I gradually forgot Jesus once more. I neglected prayer, and I began anew to seek diversions. Another niece of my aunt, who was also living with her, became very friendly with me, and we became very much alike in our wickedness. My aunt sent the two of us out together frequently, and I am sure that if Jesus had not had pity on my weakness, I would have fallen into serious sins. The love of the world began gradually to awaken in my soul, but Jesus once more came to the rescue. All of a sudden, I became stooped and began to have terrible pains in my back. I bore this for a time, but as I saw myself growing worse, I asked my aunt to take me back to Lucca. She lost no time, but sent someone back with me. But, dear Father, the thought of those months spent in sin filled me with terror. I had committed sins of every kind, Even impure thoughts had run through my mind. I had listened to bad conversation instead of fleeing from it. I had told untruths to my aunt to protect my companion. In short, I had stood on the brink of hell. Serious illness 1898-1899. Once again at Lucca, I was better for some time. I never wanted to obey when they wished a doctor to visit me, for I never wanted anyone to touch me or see me. One evening a doctor came unannounced, examined me by force, and found an abscess on my body which he feared was very serious, because he thought it had affected my spine. For a long time I had felt pain in that part of my body, but I did not want to touch or look at it, because when I was a little girl I had heard a priest say our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Those words had struck me and led me to guard my body as closely as possible. After he had visited me, the doctor called a consultant. What affliction it caused me, dear Father, to have to uncover myself. Every time the doctor touched me, I cried. After the consultation, I grew steadily worse, and I was forced to go to bed and was not able to move. Every remedy was used on me, but instead of helping me, they made me worse. While I was in bed, I was ill at ease and a source of annoyance to all. The second day I was in bed, I was not at peace, and I wrote to Monsignor telling him that I wanted to see him. He came at once, and I made a general confession. Not indeed because I was so bad off, but to regain peace of conscience which I had lost. After confession, my peace with Jesus returned, and as a sign of this, on that same evening I experienced a very deep sorrow for my sins. Then, dear Father, the pain became worse and worse, and the doctors decided to operate on me in that part of which I have spoken. 3 doctors came, and what I suffered from the pain was as nothing. I felt pain and suffering only when I found myself in their presence almost entirely unclothed. Dear Father, how much better it would have been for me to die. Finally, the doctors saw that all remedies were useless, and they gave me up entirely. After that, they came to see me only now and then through courtesy, so to speak. Regarding the nature of this illness, nearly all the doctors said it was a spinal disease, and only one insisted that it was hysteria. I had to lie in one position in bed, and it was impossible for me to move myself. In order to have a little relief now and then, I had to ask some of the family to help me to move an arm, now a leg. They took excellent care of me, but I, on the contrary, repaid them only with bad manners and short. Mary answers, receives comfort from her guardian angel. One evening, when I was more uncomfortable than usual, I was complaining to Jesus, telling him that I would not have prayed so much if I had known he was not going to cure me, and I asked him why he wanted me to be sick this way. My angel answered me as follows: if Jesus afflicts you in body, it is always in order to purify your soul. Be good. Oh, how many times during my long illness did I not experience consoling words in my heart? But I never profited by them. The thing that afflicted me most was to have to stay in bed, because I wanted to do what the others were doing. I wanted to go to confession every day and to Mass each morning. But one morning when they brought Holy Communion to me at home, Jesus made himself felt rather strongly in my soul, and he gave me a severe rebuke, telling me that I was a weak soul. It is your bad self-love that makes you resent not being able to do what the others do. He said to me, and that causes you so much confusion at seeing that you have to be helped by others. If you were dead to yourself, you would not be so disturbed. Saint Gabriel of the Sorrowful Virgin. During this time, my family was making triduums and novenas and having others make them for my cure, but they obtained nothing. I myself remained indifferent. The words of Jesus had strengthened but not converted me. One day, a lady who often came to visit me brought me a book to read, The Life of Venerable Gabriel. I took it almost disdainfully and put it on the pillow. The lady begged me to recommend myself to Gabriel, but I thought little of it. My family, however, began to say 3 paters, Aves, and Glorias in his honor every day. One day I was alone. It was a little after noon. I was attacked by a strong temptation, and I said within myself that I was tired of all this, and staying in bed annoyed me. The devil took advantage of these thoughts and began to tempt me, saying that if I had listened to him, he would have cured me and would have done all that I asked of him. Dear Father, I was on the point of giving in. I was disturbed and felt that I was conquered. But suddenly a thought came to me. My mind turned to Venerable Gabriel, and I said fervently, the soul comes first, and then the body. Nevertheless, the devil continued with even stronger assaults. 1,000 ugly thoughts rushed through my mind. Again, I turned to Venerable Gabriel, and with his help I conquered. Entering within myself, I made the sign of the cross, and in a quarter of an hour I turned to unite myself with God, whom I so little appreciated. I recall that on that very evening I began to read the life of Brother Gabriel. I read it several times. I never grew tired of reading it and admiring his virtues and his example. My resolutions were many, my deeds but few. From the day on which my new protector, Venerable Gabriel, saved my soul, I began to practice a special devotion to him. At night I could not sleep unless I had his picture under my pillow. And from that day to this I began to see him near me here. Dear Father, I do not know how to express myself. I have felt his presence. In every act, in every bad action that I have performed, I thought of Brother Gabriel and thereupon ceased the action. I have never failed to pray to him every day in these words: the soul comes before the body. One day the lady who had brought me the life of Venerable Gabriel came to take it back. In taking it from under my pillow and giving it back to her, I could not help weeping. The lady, seeing that it was so hard for me to give it up, promised to come back later and get it when the person who had given it to her requested it. She came back a few days later and I had to give it back to her, though I did so weeping. This caused me much displeasure. But that saint of God very soon rewarded this little sacrifice, for that night in a dream he appeared to me clothed in white. I did not recognize him, dear Father. When he saw that I did not recognize him, he opened the white garment, and I saw him clothed as a Passionist. I knew him immediately. I remained in silence before him. He asked me why I had cried when they took his life from me. I don't recall what I answered, but he said, "See how much your sacrifice has pleased me. It has pleased me so much that I have come myself to see you. Do you wish me well?" I did not answer. Then he comforted me and said to me, "Be good, because I will return to see you." He told me to kiss his habit and rosary, and then he went away. My imagination started working, and I found myself always awaiting another visit from him. But he did not come again for many, many months. Here is how it happened. The feast of the Immaculate Conception came. At that time, the Barbantine nuns, Sisters of Charity, were coming to change my clothing and tend to me. Among those who came, there was one who was not yet vested in the habit and who was not vested until 2 years later because she was too young. On the vigil of the feast, the nuns came as usual, and while they were there, I had an inspiration. I thought within myself, tomorrow is the feast of our Blessed Mother. If I should promise her that if she would cure me, I would become a Sister of Charity, what would happen? This thought consoled me. I told it to Sister Leonilda, and she promised that if I were cured, I could be vested with the novice of whom I spoke above. All that remained was that I should make the promise the next morning after Holy Communion. Monsignor came to hear my confession, and he immediately gave his permission. He also gave me another consolation. We made a perpetual vow of virginity together that evening, a vow which previously he had never allowed me to make. He renewed it, and I made it for the first and last time. What tremendous graces, but I have never corresponded with them. That evening I was in perfect peace. Night came and I went to sleep. All of a sudden I saw my protector standing before me at the foot of my bed. He said to me, "Gemma, make the vow to become a religious gladly, but add nothing else." "But why?" I asked. Touching me on the forehead while he looked at me and smiled, he answered, "My sister, I did not understand what it was all about." To thank him, I kissed his habit. He took the woolen heart, which Passionists wear on their breast, had me kiss it, and then placed it on the sheet over my heart, and again said to me, "My sister," with that he disappeared. The next morning there was nothing on the sheet. I went to communion and afterwards made my promise but added nothing else. I did not speak of this either with the nuns or with my confessor. At that time and many times later, the nuns reminded me of my vow because they thought I had promised to become a Sister of Charity, and they told me that our Blessed Mother could cure me. Jesus graciously accepted my vow and my poor heart was very glad. Miraculous cure, March 3, 1899. But the months passed and I did not get any better. On the 4th of January, the doctors tried another remedy. They cauterized me in places along the spine. That was enough. I began to grow worse. Besides the usual pains, on January I began to suffer an unbearable headache. The doctor whom they called said that it was very dangerous, calling it a tumor of the brain. They could not operate because I was suffering from extreme weakness. I grew worse from day to day, and on the 2nd of February they brought me holy viaticum. I made my confession and I was waiting to go and be with Jesus. It seemed that it would be soon. The doctors, thinking that I was no longer conscious, said among themselves that I would not live until midnight. Live Jesus. One of my teachers in school, of whom I have spoken above, came to see me and to tell me farewell, saying that she would see me on heaven. But nonetheless she begged me to make a novena to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque, assuring me that she would gain for me the grace either of being cured perfectly or else of entering heaven immediately after death. This teacher, before she would leave my bed, made me promise her to begin the novena that same evening. It was February 18th. I did begin it. That very evening I said the prayers for the first time. The next day I forgot them. On the 20th I began all over again, but once more I forgot to say the prayers. This was very poor attention to prayer, was it not, dear Father? On the 23rd I began for the third time, that is, I intended to, but a little before midnight I heard a rosary rattling, and I felt a hand resting on my forehead. I heard someone begin saying the Pater, Ave and Gloria, and repeating them 9 times. I could hardly answer the prayers because my pain was so intense. Then that same voice that had said the prayers asked me, "Do you want to be cured?" "It's all the same to me," I answered. "Yes," he said, "you will be cured. Pray with faith to the heart of Jesus. Every evening until the novena is finished I will be here with you, and we will pray to the heart of Jesus together." "And Blessed Margaret Mary?" I asked. "You may add 3 Glorias in her honor." The same thing happened for 9 successive nights. The same person came every evening, placed his hand on my forehead, and we recited together the prayers of the Sacred Heart, after which he had me add 3 Glorias in honor of Margaret Mary. It was the second to last day of the novena, and I wanted to receive communion on the last day, which was the first Friday of March. I sent for my confessor and went to confession. The next morning I received communion. What happy moments I spent with Jesus. He kept repeating to me, "Gemma, do you want to be cured?" I was so moved that I could not answer. Poor Jesus. The grace had been given. I was cured. Tenderness of Jesus. "My daughter," Jesus said, embracing me, "I give myself entirely to you, and you will be entirely mine." I saw clearly that Jesus had taken my parents from me, and sometimes this made me discouraged, because I believed myself abandoned. That morning I complained to Jesus about this, and he, always so good and tender, said to me, "My daughter, I will always be with you. I will be your father," and she, indicating our mother of sorrows, will be your mother. "He who is my hands can never lack fatherly help. You will never lack anything, even though I have taken away from you all earthly consolation and support. Come, draw near to me, that you are my daughter." Are you not happy to be the daughter of Jesus and marry the overwhelming affections to which Jesus gave rise in my heart kept me from answering? After about 2 hours had passed, I arose. Those in the house wept for joy. I too was happy, not because I was cured, but because Jesus had chosen me to be his daughter. Before leaving me that morning, Jesus said to me, "To the grace that has been given you this morning there will be added many more and greater ones," and this has been so true, because Jesus has always protected me in a special way. I have treated him only with coldness and indifference, and in exchange he has given me only signs of infinite love, hunger for the Eucharist. From that time on I could hardly bear not to receive Jesus every morning. But I was not able to do so. I had the permission of my confessor to do so, but I was so weak that I could hardly stand on my feet. On the second Friday of March 1899, I went to church for the first time to receive Holy Communion, and from then until now I have continued to go every day. I missed only now and then because my great sins made me unworthy, or as a chastisement imposed on me by my confessor, with the Visitandine sisters. That same morning, the second Friday of March, the Visitandine sisters wanted to see me. I went to see them, and they promised me that in May I could come to them and make a course of spiritual exercises. Furthermore, they told me that if my desire proved to be a true vocation, they would take me into the convent in June for good. I felt great contentment in the thought of this, especially since Monsignor was in perfect accord with the idea. Holy Week of 1899. The month of March passed with me receiving communion every morning, and Jesus was filling me with unspeakable consolations. Then came Holy Week. I wanted so much to attend the sacred functions, but Jesus had arranged otherwise. During the Holy Week, he asked of me a great sacrifice. Wednesday of Holy Week came. No sign had been given me except that when I received communion, Jesus made himself felt in a most wonderful manner. her guardian angel as master and guide. From the moment when I got up from my sick bed, my guardian angel began to be my master and guide. He corrected me every time I did something wrong, and he taught me to speak but little, and that only when I was spoken to. One day when those in the house were speaking of some person and were not speaking very well of her, I wanted to speak up, but the angel gave me a severe rebuke. He taught me to keep my eyes cast down, and one time in church he reproved me strongly, saying to me, "Is this the way to conduct yourself in the presence of God?" And another time he chided me in this way, "If you are not good, I will not let you see me anymore." He taught me many times how to act in the presence of God, that is, to adore him in his infinite goodness, his infinite majesty, his mercy, and in all his attributes. First Holy Hour, Jesus crucified. As I said before, we were in Holy Week. It was Wednesday. My confessor had finally decided that it would be well for me to make a general confession, as I had desired for so long a time. He chose a late hour on Wednesday for me to do this. In his infinite mercy, Jesus gave me a very deep sorrow for my sins, and here is how it came about. On Thursday evening, I began to make the Holy Hour. I had promised the Sacred Heart that if I were cured, I would make the Holy Hour every Thursday. Without fail, this was the first time I had made it out of bed. I had made it on the preceding Thursdays, but in bed, because my confessor would not let me make it any other way on account of my extreme weakness. But from the time of my general confession, he permitted me to make it out of bed. I began, therefore, to make the Holy Hour, but I felt myself so full of sorrow for my sins that it was a time of continual martyrdom. However, in the midst of this sorrow, there was one comfort, namely, weeping. This was both a comfort and a relief to me. I spent the entire hour praying and weeping. Finally, being very tired, I sat down, but the sorrow continued. I became entirely recollected, and after a little bit, all of a sudden I felt my strength fail. It was only with great difficulty that I was able to get up and lock the door to the room. Where was I? Dear Father, I found myself before Jesus crucified. He was bleeding all over. I lowered my eyes, and the sight filled me with pain. I made the sign of the cross, and immediately my anguish was succeeded by peace of soul. I continued to feel an even stronger sorrow for my sins, and I had not the courage to raise my eyes and look at Jesus. I prostrated myself on the floor and remained there for several hours. "My daughter," he said, "behold these wounds. They have all been opened for your sins. But now be consoled, for they have all been closed by your sorrow. Do not offend me anymore. Love me as I have always loved you. Love me." This he repeated several times. The vision vanished, and I returned to my senses. From that time on, I began to have a great horror for sin, which was the greatest grace Jesus has given me. The wounds of Jesus remained so vividly impressed in my mind that they have never been effaced. Good Friday, March 31, 1899. On the morning of Good Friday, I received Holy Communion, and I would have liked to have gone to the 31 services that day in honor of the agony. But my family would not permit it, even though I wept. With great difficulty, I made this first sacrifice to Jesus. And Jesus, always so generous, saw fit to reward me, even though I made the sacrifice with much difficulty. I shut myself in my room, therefore, to make the hour of agony alone. But I was not alone. My guardian angel came to me, and we prayed together. We assisted Jesus in all his sufferings and compassionated our mother in her sorrows. But my angel did not fail to give me a gentle rebuke, telling me that I should not cry when I had to make a sacrifice to Jesus, but that I should rather thank those who offered me the occasion to do so. This was the first time, and also the first Friday, on which Jesus made himself felt so strongly in my soul. And although I did not receive communion from the hands of a priest, because it was impossible, Jesus nevertheless came himself and communicated himself to me. And this union with him was so overwhelming that I remained as if stupefied. Jesus spoke very strongly to me. "What are you doing?" he said to me. "What have you to say? Aren't you ever moved at all?" Then it was that, not being able to resist any longer, I blurted out, "O Jesus, how is it that you, who are most perfect and all holy, choose one so full of coldness and imperfection to love?" He answered, "I am burning with desire to unite myself with you. Hasten to receive me every morning. But remember that I am a father and a zealous spouse. Will you be my daughter and my faithful spouse?" I made 1,000 promises to Jesus that morning, but, my God, how soon I forgot them. I always felt a horror for sin, but at the same time I was always committing it. And Jesus was not satisfied with me, though he ever consoled me, sending my guardian angel to be my guide in everything. After these things happened to me, I felt that I should speak to my confessor about them. I went to confession, but I did not have the courage. I left the confessional without saying anything about it. I returned home, and on entering my room I noticed that my angel was weeping. I didn't have the courage to ask him what he was crying about, but he himself told me, "Do you want to be deprived of seeing me anymore? You are a bad girl. You are hiding things from your confessor. Remember this, and I am telling you for the last time. If you ever hide anything else from your confessor, I will never let you see me anymore. Never, never." I fell to my knees, and he told me to make an act of contrition and made me promise to reveal everything to my confessor. With this, he pardoned me in the name of Jesus. A severe reproof from Jesus. The month of April had arrived. I was impatiently awaiting the time when I could go to the Visitandine sisters to make a retreat as they had promised me. One time, it was one morning after communion, Jesus told me about something that had displeased him very much. I had committed the fault the evening before. 2 young girls who were friends of one of my sisters used to come to our house, and though their conversation was not bad, it was worldly. This time I took part in the conversation, adding my little bit like the others. But the next morning Jesus rebuked me so severely that it inspired in me a great terror, and I would have desired never to see or speak to anyone else. Nevertheless, Jesus continued to make himself felt in my soul every day, filling me with consolation. And I, on the other hand, continued to turn my back to him and offend him without any sorrow. Thirst for love and suffering. 2 sentiments were engendered in my heart after the first time Jesus made himself felt and allowed me to see him covered with blood. The first was to love him even to the point of sacrifice. But since I did not know how to love him truly, I asked my confessor to teach me, and he answered as follows: how do we learn to read and write? We practice reading and writing over and over until we finally learn how. This answer did not convince me. In fact, I didn't know what he meant. Often I asked him the same question, but he always gave me the same answer. The other sentiment that sprung up in my heart after having seen Jesus was a desire to suffer something for him, seeing that he had suffered so much for me. I got myself a thick rope which I took secretly from the well, made several knots in it, and put it around my body. But I didn't have it on a quarter of an hour before my guardian angel reproved me and made me take it off, because I had not asked my confessor's permission and obtained it. But my great affliction was not being able to love Jesus as I wished. I tried eagerly not to offend him, but my bad inclination to evil was so strong that without a special grace of God, I would have fallen into hell. Learn how to love. Not knowing how to love Jesus caused me much concern, but he, in his infinite goodness, was never ashamed to humiliate me in order that he might become my master. One evening when I was at prayer, he came to bring peace to my soul. I felt myself entirely recollected, and I found myself a second time before Jesus crucified. He said to me, "Look, daughter, and learn how to love," and he showed me his 5 open wounds. "Do you see this cross, these thorns, these nails, these bruises, these tears, these wounds, this blood? They are all works of love and of infinite love. Do you see how much I have loved you? Do you really want to love me? Then first learn to suffer. It is by suffering that one learns to love." On seeing this, I experienced a new sorrow in thinking of the infinite love of Jesus for us and the sufferings he had undergone for our salvation. I fell fainting to the floor, and I remained thus for several hours. All that had happened to me during these times of prayer brought me such great consolation that although they were prolonged for several hours, I was not tired out. I continued to make the holy hour every Thursday, but sometimes it happened that it lasted until about 2 o'clock, because I was with Jesus, and almost always he gave me a share in the grief that he experienced in the garden at the sight of my many sins and those of the entire world. It was such a deep sorrow that it could well be compared to the agony of death. After all this, I would experience so sweet a calm and consolation that I had to give vent to it in tears. And these tears made me taste an incomprehensible love and increased in me the desire to love Jesus and to suffer for him. And in the monastery of the Visitandines. The time of the retreat I wanted so much was drawing near, and on the 1st of May, 1899 at 3 o'clock I went into the convent. I felt that I was entering heaven itself. What consolations! For the first time I forbade those of my family to come to see me during that time, because those days were all for Jesus. On the evening that I entered, Monsignor came and granted me the permission, as the Mother Superior desired, that I should not make the retreat in private, but that I should make it as a kind of test. that is, doing all that the nuns did. This consoled me in one way, but in another way it displeased me because that way I could not be as recollected. But I wanted to obey without a word. The Mother Superior put the mistress of novices in charge of me. She gave me a schedule to follow while I was there. I had to rise at 5 o'clock, go to the choir at 5:30, receive Holy Communion, and then recite prime and sext with the nuns. Then I would leave the choir to take breakfast and a half hour later go to my cell. At 9 o'clock, I would go to the choir again for the community mass and to recite none. Then, at 9:30, Monsignor would come to give me a little conference if he could. But when he could not come, I would make a meditation from a book that he sent me during that time, and then he would come in the evening to give me a little talk. At 10:15, when the meditation was over, I would make a visit to Jesus with the nuns. From 10:30 until 11:30 was the dinner hour, and from then until 12:30 we had recreation. I had permission from Monsignor to spend only one recreation period a day with the nuns, because I wanted to spend the evening recreation in the choir with Jesus. At 12:30 I went to the novitiate where there was work until 3 o'clock. At 3 we went again to the choir to recite Vespers, and then the community gathered for an instruction from the superior until 5 o'clock. At 5 we went again to the choir to recite Compline, which was followed by an hour of meditation which we made in any manner we pleased. After meditation we went to the refectory again, and then to recreation. This recreation period I spent with the superior in her room or else in the choir. At 8:30 the community gathered again for about a half hour, and at 9 we recited matins and went to bed. Dear Father, it seemed to me that this type of life was almost too easy for the nuns, and rather than becoming attached to it, I began instead to dislike that manner of life. The novices, who all had special concern for me, would advise me now and then and speak of those things which were more appealing about the community, but I gave no thought to these things. The thing that afflicted me was the thought that I had to return to the world. I would have preferred to remain there, even though that form of life did not appeal to me, than return again to those places where there were many occasions of offending Jesus. I begged Monsignor to grant me the permission to remain at the convent. With the permission of the Mother Superior and the entire community, I asked permission of the Archbishop to remain there, but he would not grant it, saying that my health was still so poor that I was 33 wearing an iron brace on my back. To hold it straight, I haven't the slightest idea who told the Archbishop. The Mother Superior commanded me under obedience, therefore, to take off the brace. I wept on receiving this command because I well knew that I could not do without it. I ran to the novitiate and prayed to my dear child Jesus. Then I hastened to my room. I took it off, and though nearly 2 years have passed since then, I have never worn it again, and I am doing very well. The Superior, on hearing of this, hastened to tell the Monsignor that he might inform the Archbishop. There was only one more day left of the retreat, and Monsignor came to hear my confession. He asked me if I would remain in the convent for 12 more days, because on May 21st some of the sisters were going to make their profession, and they wanted me to be present. I was infinitely happy to remain with them, but I was convinced of one thing, that life was too easy for me. I had sinned so much that I must do penance. I revealed my fears to Jesus after communion, and Jesus, ever considering my misery, consoled me and made himself felt in my soul, quieting me with consoling words. I was present, as Monsignor wished, at the profession of 4 novices. That morning I wept very much. Jesus was closer to me than usual, and some of the sisters who saw me came up to me and asked if I needed anything, because I was at the point of losing my senses. It was true. The nuns had forgotten to give me breakfast, and they hadn't given me my dinner yet, so that I ate only after 1 o'clock dot, but I received a stiff rebuke for this, as I deserved. I should have gone to the refectory on my own when the bell rang dot, but I was ashamed, or rather, listen, dear Father, to what limit my malice, or rather my human respect leads me. The Mother Superior always kept me beside her wherever we were. But that day of profession the newly professed nuns took their place alongside the Superior, so that I remained outside without eating. My pride would not allow me to take second place to them. My God, I merited worse, but Jesus still supported me. He chastised me by not making himself felt for several days. I wept much on account of this, but Jesus sent my guardian angel to me again, and he said to me, "Happy you, daughter, who deserve such a just punishment." I understood none of these words, but they brought consolation to my heart. Returns to her family. Nostalgia for the cloistered, deluded hopes. My God, there came another sorrow. The next day I had to leave the convent and return home. I wanted that day never to come, but it was at hand. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon on May 21st, 1899, I had to leave. In tears, I asked the blessing of the Mother Superior, said goodbye to the nuns, and left. My God, what grief! But an even greater sorrow was to follow soon on this one. I returned to my family, but I was no longer able to adapt myself. My mind and heart were fixed on the idea of becoming a religious, and no one could discourage me from it. In order to leave the world, I seriously considered becoming a visitandi nun at once. Almost every day I would hasten to the monastery, and the sisters promised me that in the month of June, on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, they would accept me. I must say, however, that my heart was not fully at rest, because I knew that the visitandi life was too easy for me. And many times, on different occasions, Jesus said to me in my heart, "Daughter, you need a more austere rule." But I very seldom paid any attention to these words, and I remained firm in resolution. We began the month of June, and I noticed that the nuns were changing their attitude. Every time I went to see the superior, they told me that she could not come, and she would send first one, then another to talk to me. They began to speak seriously to me, telling me that unless I could bring at least 4 medical certificates with me, I would not be accepted. I tried to fulfill this requirement, but all efforts were in vain. The doctors would not cooperate, and one day the nuns told me that when I brought the certificates, they would receive me immediately, but until then, absolutely not. This decision did not disturb me in the least, because Jesus was consoling me with so many graces. A very precious grace, the Stigmata. On the 8th of June after communion, Jesus told me that evening he would give me a very great grace. I went that same day to confession, and I told Monsignor about it. He told me to be very attentive so that I could tell him all about it afterwards. Evening came, and all of a sudden, earlier than usual, I felt an interior sorrow for my sins far deeper than I had ever experienced before. In fact, it brought me very, very close to death. After this, all the powers of my soul became recollected. My intellect could think of nothing but my sins and the offense they gave to God. My memory recalled all my sins to mind and made me see all the torments that Jesus had suffered in order to save me. And my will made me detest them and promise to be willing to suffer anything in order to expiate them. My mind was flooded with thoughts of sorrow, of love, of fear, of hope, and of comfort. Following on this interior recollection, I was quickly wrapped out of my senses, and I found myself before my Heavenly Mother. At her right stood my guardian angel, who told me to make an act of contrition. When I had finished it, my Blessed Mother said to me, "Daughter, in the name of Jesus, all your sins are forgiven." Then she added, "Jesus, my son, loves you very much, and he wants to give you a grace. Do you know how to make yourself worthy of it?" In my misery, I did not know what to answer. She continued, "I will be your mother. Will you be a true daughter?" She spread her mantle and covered me with it. At that moment, Jesus appeared with all his wounds open. But blood no longer came out of those wounds. Rather, flames as of fire issued forth from them, and in a moment those flames came to touch my hands, feet, and heart. I felt as if I would die. I fell to the floor. But my mother supported me, keeping me covered with her mantle. I had to remain for several hours in that position. Then the Blessed Mother kissed me on the forehead, and it all disappeared, and I found myself kneeling on the floor. But I still felt an intense pain in my hands, feet, and heart. I arose to lie down on the bed, and I noticed that blood was flowing from those places where I felt pain. I covered these parts as best I could, and then, with the help of my angel, I was able to get in bed. These sufferings and pains, although they afflicted me, filled me with perfect peace. The next morning I was able to go to communion only with great difficulty, and I put on a pair of gloves in order to hide my hands. I could hardly stand on my feet, and I thought I would die any minute. The sufferings continued until 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, the solemn feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I should have told these things to my confessor at once, but instead I went to confession several times without saying anything about them. He asked me about it several times, but I would not tell him. The stigmata is repeated. Meanwhile, some time passed, and every Thursday about 8 o'clock I began to feel the usual sufferings. And every time this happened to me, I first felt a deep and intense sorrow for my sins. This caused me more suffering than the pains in my hands, feet, head, and heart. This sorrow for my sins reduced me to a state of grief close to death. But in spite of this wonderful grace from God, I did not improve, but rather I committed numerous sins every day. I was disobedient and insincere with my confessor, always hiding something or other from him. My angel admonished me many times, telling me that if I continued to do this, he would not allow me to see him anymore. But I did not obey him, and he did go away, or rather he would only hide himself for a while. Ardent desire for the cloistered Jesus comforts and reproves her. During this time, my desire to become a nun kept increasing. I told my confessor about this, but he gave me little consolation. I spoke to Jesus about it, and one morning when I felt this desire more strongly than usual, Jesus said to me, "Daughter, what are you afraid of? Hide this desire in my heart, and no one will be able to take it away." Jesus spoke to me in this way because since this desire to go to the convent and unite myself forever with Jesus was so great, I feared someone would be able to take it away from me. But Jesus immediately consoled me with these words and others that I have forgotten. Jesus never failed to make himself felt and seen, especially when I was afflicted. One day, which deserves special mention, I had been scolded, as I always deserved, by one of my brothers because I was going everything. And tell me, daughter, can you deny me such a just satisfaction and such a little recompense? I could not find words to answer Jesus. My heart almost burst with sorrow, and I said the following words which I remember so well. My heart, O Jesus, is ready to do everything. It is ready to burst with sorrow if you will it, my God. Mission at St. Martin. The month of June was almost over, and near the end of the month a mission began in the Church of St. Martin. I always preferred to miss the mission rather than miss the sermons on the Sacred Heart at the Visitation Church. But finally the latter ended, and I began to go to hear the mission sermons in St. Martin Church. I cannot describe the impression made on me when I saw those priests preach. The impression was very great because I saw that they were clothed with the same kind of habit that Brother Gabriel was wearing the first time I saw him. I was seized with such an affection for them that I never missed a sermon from that day until the end of the mission. The last day of the mission arrived, and all the people were gathered in the church for the general communion. I was among the large crowd, and Jesus, who was greatly pleased, made himself strongly felt by my soul, and he said to me, "Gemma, do you like the habit that priest is wearing?" He indicated a Passionist who was somewhat distant from me. I did not answer with words, but my heart answered him with its palpitations. He added, "Would you like to be clothed with the same habit?" "My God," I exclaimed. "Yes," Jesus continued, "you will be a daughter of my passion, and a well-beloved daughter. One of these sons of the passion will be your father. Go and reveal everything," and I saw that Jesus indicated Father Ignatius. I obeyed. On the last day of the mission I went to church, but no matter how hard I tried, I could hardly bring myself to speak of the affairs of my soul. Instead of going to Father Ignatius, I went to Father Cajetan, and with great difficulty I told him about all that had happened to me as I have here related. He listened to me with infinite patience, and he promised he would return to Lucca the following Monday, and then he would have more time for my confession. Such was the arrangement. A week later I was able to go to confession to him again, and I continued to go to him the next few times. At this time, and by means of this priest, I made the acquaintance of a lady to whom I have to this day the love of a mother, and whom I have always regarded as such. The 3 vows. The only reason I went to confession to this priest was this: my ordinary confessor had forbidden me many times to make the 3 vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty, because it would be impossible to observe them as long as I remained in the world. I, who had always had a great desire to make them, made use of that occasion, and this was the first thing I asked of him. He immediately gave me the permission to make them from the 5th of July to the solemn feast of the 8th of September, and then they were to be renewed. I was very happy at this, and it became one of my greatest consolations. At the cost of great patience on the part of this priest, and with great shame on my part, one revealed everything to him. I told him of all the particular graces the Lord had given me, the visits from my guardian angel, the presence of Jesus, and also some penances which of my own accord, and without any permission, I had been performing every day. He at once commanded me to cease doing these things, and he took from me some of the instruments of penance that I had been using. Then this priest spoke clearly to me and told me that he was not in a position to direct me properly, and that I must reveal everything to my confessor. I was in no way minded to follow this advice, because I foresaw a great struggle, and I feared the danger of being abandoned by Monsignor on account of my lack of sincerity and confidence in him. On no condition would I tell this priest the name of my confessor. I told him that I did not know who he was, and I might have even invented a false name. I don't remember, but my little trick did not go far. To my great shame, I was discovered. Father Cajetan knew that Monsignor was my confessor, but he could not speak to him about me unless I gave him permission. Finally, after keeping him in suspense for a while, I gave him permission, and it turned out that the two of them were in complete agreement. Monsignor gave me permission to go to this father to confession whenever I wished and did not scold me as I had indeed deserved. I told Monsignor about the vows I had made, and he approved of them, adding to them a fourth vow, namely sincerity with my confessor. He further commanded me to remain hidden and to speak of the affairs of my soul to no one but himself. Futile visit by the doctor, reproofs from Jesus. Meanwhile, the Friday occurrences continued, and Monsignor thought it well to have a doctor visit me during one of them without my knowing it. But Jesus warned me, saying, "Tell your confessor that in the presence of the doctor I will do none of the things that he desires." Following the advice of Jesus, I told my confessor about this, but he did as he had planned, and events turned out as Jesus had said, as you already know. Dear Father, from that day a new life began for me, and I could tell you many things here, but Jesus willing, I will tell them to you when we are alone in the confessional. This was the first and best humiliation that Jesus gave me. Nevertheless, my great pride and self-love resented it, but Jesus in his infinite charity continued to give me his graces and favors. One day Jesus lovingly said to me, "Dear Father, because Jesus spoke these words to me, I will tell them to you alone, but maybe you will understand them without me explaining them. Daughter, what can I say when you, in all your doubts, afflictions, and adversities, think always of yourself instead of me? When you always hasten to find some relief and comfort rather than turn to me? Dear Father, do you understand?" This was a just rebuke from Jesus, one that I knew I well deserved. But nonetheless I continued as usual, and Jesus again reproved me, saying, "Gemma, do you think that I am not offended when in your great needs you turn to things that cannot bring you consolation instead of turning to me? I suffer, daughter, when I see you forget me." This last reproof was enough for me, and it succeeded in detaching me entirely from every creature in order to seek my Creator in everything. Father Germanu. I received another prohibition from my confessor regarding the extraordinary experiences on Thursdays and Fridays, and Jesus obeyed for a little while. But then they returned as formerly, and even more so. I was no longer afraid to reveal everything to my confessor, and he told me emphatically that if he was not allowed to see these things clearly, he would not believe in such fantasies. Without losing any time, that very day I said a special prayer to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament for this intention. And behold, as often happened to me, I felt myself become interiorly recollected, and soon I was rapt out of my senses. I found myself before Jesus, but he was not alone. Standing beside him was a man with white hair, and from his habit I knew that he was a Passionist. He had his hands joined and he was praying fervently. As I looked at him, Jesus said to me, "Daughter, do you know him?" I told him no, as was true. "Look," he added, "that priest will be your director, and it will be he who will recognize in you, miserable creature, the infinite work of my mercy." After this happened, I thought no more of it. But one day I chanced to see a little portrait. It was without a doubt a picture of the priest that I had seen beside Jesus, though the likeness was very poor. Dear Father, my intimate union with you in prayer began from the moment when I first saw you with Jesus in my vision. From then on, I always wanted to have you with me, but the more I desired it, the more it seemed impossible. From that day on, I would pray many times a day for this, and after several months, Jesus consoled me by having you come to see me. Now I will say no more, because from that time until now you have always known me, and you know everything.